Good evening. Welcome. I'd like to call our meeting, the April 28th regular meeting of the City Council to order. Thank you all for attending. Will please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all. Again, welcome. Madam Clerk, could you call the roll call?
Mr. Baruch?
Here.
Ms. Connolly? Here. Mr. Duncan?
Here.
Ms. Oliver? Here. Mr. Snyder?
Here.
Mr. Z?
Here.
Mayor Charter?
Here.
Thank you, Council.
Thank you. Do we have a motion to adopt the meeting agenda?
Mr. Mayor, I move we adopt the meeting agenda.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? None? Motion carries. We do have one proclamation this evening. Whereas since 1985, the President and Congress have designated the first week of May as Public Service Recognition Week for federal, state, county, and city employees. And whereas every day of the year and at all hours of the day and night, city employees provide critical, important public services to citizens of the City of Falls Church and the region. Whereas the City Council and Mayor ask the public to join them in recognizing and celebrating the city's dedicated employees for their work in providing essential services to the public, including promoting public safety with the high standards of professional law enforcement, providing a world-class public education for our children, hosting and promoting wonderful special events, enriching our lives with great books and library services, maintaining our streets and sidewalks, providing vital water and sanitary sewer services, developing recreational programs for all ages, caring for the elderly and persons in need, promoting well-planned, high-quality development, caring for our trees, and providing the Falls Church style of personal and responsive customer service at all times. And whereas we ask for more city employees, we ask more of our city employees with each year, and city employees always go the extra mile to meet the needs of the citizens of Falls Church. Now, therefore, I, P. David Tarter, Mayor of the City of Falls Church, Virginia, do proclaim the week of May 4th through May 10th as Public Service Recognition Week, and thank all city employees for their contributions during the past year, which helped make the City of Falls Church such a great place to live, work, and play. In witness whereof, I have hereto set my hand and caused the seal of the City of Falls Church to be affixed this 28th day of April 2014. Do we have any city employees in the audience, by the way? One. We have one. Come on forward. Do you want to? No, okay. Well, we still nonetheless thank you and the rest of our dedicated staff. Appreciate all the efforts that you do. So thank you so much. Madam Clerk, do we have any oaths of office to be administered?
I believe Doug Devereaux is here to be sworn in for the CACT.
Okay. Please come forward, sir. Service. Next, before we get to public comment, we do have an Eagle Scout we'd like to recognize. Newly minted Eagle Scout Michael Andrew Keys. we'd ask that you come up, sir, and we'd like to congratulate you formally for your good work. As you're coming up, Michael is a junior at George Marshall High School, and his project was the redesign and painting of the parking lot for the American Legion Post 130 in Falls Church. So thank you for all your good work. It's quite an accomplishment, and we're all very proud of you. So come on up, maybe we'll get a picture taken with you. Congratulations. Come on around, we'll get a... Yeah, that's perfect. There we go. Thank you. Congratulations again. Take care. Okay, so we have some public comment, and I imagine some of you will want to speak on the budget. You're welcome to speak either now and stick around. You can speak now and leave, or you can wait till the budget item comes up and speak at that time. So as I call your name, if you could indicate whether you want to speak now or whether you want to speak later, or forever hold your peace. The folks who will speak, I would ask that you state your name and your address and keep your comments to 3 minutes. First on the list is Joanna Berry, someone near and dear to all of our hearts up here. So would you like to speak now, Ms. Berry? Okay, come on down.
She says that she rises from her seat
Yeah.
and heads to the... Hi there. Good evening. Johanna Barry, 111 East Jefferson Street, Falls Church. Colleagues, I appreciate the position you are in as you contemplate the 2015 budget. Trust me, I do. Balancing the needs of the entire Falls Church community, not only our present residents, but our future residents, is a task which demands your best thinking. You will certainly be receiving a lot of commentary tonight, and I would like to make mine brief. I support the professional city staff's position that declines to use any extraordinary funding, the water system sale as an example, for any operational deficit. Using extraordinary funds for operational needs hamstrings the city's future, and it is this council's obligation to not only address this year's budget, but to think creatively and proactively about the future of this city. And in that vein, let me simply say that whether the tax rate stays steady or goes up a few cents, or through whatever financial legerdemain we come up with to get a balanced budget, the real issue that council, the school division, and our citizens will need to confront is the increasing budget demands of our school system and our city's ability to meet that demand. And until a substantial, substantive discussion takes place, and not simply a pep rally about the school's needs and the city's long-term sustainability, I'm afraid that this and future councils will find themselves once again at the 11th hour pondering the imponderable. I thank you for your service.
Thank you for your service. We appreciate you coming out tonight. Ms. Tony Jones? Welcome.
Tony Jones, and I live at 444 West Broad, also the school superintendent. First of all, I just want to say thank you for the many hours that all of you have spent working through the budget process. We do acknowledge your life as a public servant, and we know it's not easy. You miss dinner with your families, activities with your children, and take phone calls and emails 7 days a week, and that does not go unnoticed. So thank you for that, first of all. As we reflect over the past 5 years, FCCPS has grown by almost 400 students, and by this time next year, we fully expect that number to have grown by almost 600. This is larger than the size of our entire middle school population. I think all of you on City Council understand the enrollment pressures that we face. We spend months crafting a budget to maintain excellence of our schools while working to stay within parameters that fund us at a per-student level that is less than we were in 2007. We are doing more with less. We only ask for what we need and not for 1 penny more. We have a very special school system nestled in Northern Virginia, one which parents know that when they buy their home in Falls Church, their child will not go through a redistricting and be shuffled from school to school. Our families know that our children who start kindergarten together can stay together for 13 years. Our families can pick up the phone and call the teacher, the principal, superintendent, school board member, and even a city council member. They know their bus drivers and crossing guards, some who have served in those positions for 30 years. We have a high school that is small and personal where students can still participate in multiple sports and activities. This is not the norm in Northern Virginia. Although we feel like we're growing, you can add up the students from all 4 of our schools, and that's how many students are in some of our neighboring high schools. We continue to uphold the very principles on which Falls Church was founded: commitment to quality education, not just 1 test score, not 2 scores, but on the whole child. The original 24 acres of the GM-MEH property was purchased in 1949 by the school board. It's still owned by the school board, and it has certainly served us well for the $40,000 price we paid for that land. Investment in education pays off in many, many ways. Thank you for looking at data, seeking accurate information, and working to understand our request. I couldn't stand before you and respectfully ask for anything less than to fund our full request, not for any other reason than the simple fact that this is about our children and the continued excellence to education that was made many years ago in our wonderful city of Falls Church. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and also thank you for your commitment to the schools. We appreciate it. Our next speaker is Karen Jones. Welcome.
I live at 109 Gresham Place, and I've lived in Falls Church for about 8 years now, and I love the city. I'm speaking for myself as well as many of my neighbors. School spending in the little city is not sustainable, and some warn that Falls Church has already begun an economic death spiral. Our fiscal cliff may only be 2 years away. While we all agree public education is vital to our nation, the global economy, and the future, Falls Church school spending is just not sustainable. The little city's students will suffer once the school spending bubble pops. Students will be left with scarce resources, good teachers will migrate to Fairfax, Arlington, or elsewhere, and our school system supervisors who currently have a total compensation of $280K per year will scramble to replace their high salaries. In a nutshell, please stop the misguided spending of our school system and start managing the growth. This is the highest growth of any other division in Northern Virginia. How can we manage the growth of these schools? This little city simply lacks the economies of scale that neighboring jurisdictions enjoy. Arlington County has twice the commercial base, and Fairfax County is much, much larger. It is a challenge. This is not easy. But across our nation over the past 100 years, many school systems have found themselves in the same situation. I researched a statistic that over the last 100 years, 100,000 school systems consolidated, and primarily and often maybe for reasons similar to what we're facing here with our budget challenges. I asked the City Council to consider school system consolidation either with Arlington County or Fairfax County, and to consider this before it is too late. Finally, my neighbors and I often feel we are living in the school system of Falls Church and not the city of Falls Church. One council member works for the school system and another one is married to someone who works for the school system. This appears to be a conflict of interest. I have grave concerns about how the council members might be ignoring their fiduciary responsibilities and not managing for all the residents, and instead focusing simply on the school system. I urge you to consider focusing on the future of all the citizens here and restraining this type of spending. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming out this evening. Our next speaker is Mr. Edwin Henderson. Mr. Henderson, welcome.
Thank you. And it's good to be here in front of you guys. I know you've been working hard and you've been listening to a lot of people. I can see you have 4 options you've gotten for budget, so I know that you're making compromises all the way around. I also see that since last time I was here, there are many that have voiced the same sentiment that I came before you and expressed last time. That being that the funding of the schools is increasingly unsustainable. More than 50% of Falls Church citizenry have no children in the school system. Developers' proffers always are heavily loaded towards giving money towards the schools. And I'm wondering, for those that don't have kids in the schools, what is our return on our investment, that being our tax dollars that we pay to the city in property taxes each year? I find we pay more and more and we get less and less. And one thing that I do believe, that if the council invested more money in, you would get more people visiting this city and spending money, and that is in the area of arts and culture. I don't see any money really going to arts and culture, even though we have an arts and cultural district, so to speak. It's been designated as such, but I don't really see any capital outlay. And if it is, it's like, what, $30,000 to be split between a couple of dozen nonprofit organizations, which are heavily underfunded, so they really can't do a lot which they would like to do. We also have a crumbling infrastructure. We had a bad winter this year, and I'm sure those potholes are messing up some people's cars. However, do we have money to fix the streets? That fund has been enormously underfunded for the last 6-7 years. And, you know, we can't have a first-rate school and a third-rate roads. Something's got to give. And for those of us that are elderly, retired, living on a fixed income, many of us are being driven out of the city because we can no longer afford to live here in Falls Church, the city that we love. For those reasons, I have to reiterate my objection to the taxes going up and the services going down. Thank you very much.
For coming this evening, we appreciate it. Our next speaker is Amanda Blanchard. Welcome. Thank you for coming.
A long day.
Thank you for coming out this evening.
My name is Amanda Blanchard, and I am a teacher in Falls Church City. I come to you on behalf of the many staff members who are behind me. Give them a wave. We know that it's an incredibly difficult task to balance what the city needs and what the school needs. I'm pretty sure, if my memory serves me right, in the 12 years I've been here, every year we remind everyone that I'm pretty sure our city started because we wanted individualized, small, supportive schools for our students. If Jessie Thackeray were here to tell you, she would tell you, we started our city for our schools. Okay? We need those schools to be retaining the best teachers for those students. Our school board has laid out a plan to do that. So hopefully we will get those teachers to stay and not migrate anywhere. Additionally, we need the class sizes to be in a situation where students can learn and can get the instruction that they need, and not so large, perhaps like other surrounding districts, where they don't get what they need. In Falls Church City, students who come to our schools, as many as they come, we service them. We want to continue to service them at the level that is appropriate and necessary. That does require full funding of the school board transfer. I know that will be a hard decision, both for you and the citizens, but I think it's necessary. Thank you so much for your time and we hope that we can get your support. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time and your service to the community. We appreciate it. Our next speaker is Mr. Ira Kalin. Mr. Kalin, welcome back.
Thank you. Ira Kalin, 429 Park Avenue, and I have a few soothing words to tell the council, as you can imagine. The most fiscally responsible proposal of all of the options and proposals was the one submitted by the city manager. The others have varying impact, with option 3 being by far the best of the lot. However, this option still relies on city-side expenditure reductions and using debt savings that don't really exist. All of the other options are not fiscally responsible. Rather, what they accomplish is to set the stage for yet another bruising discussion in FY16. Council members who want to run down the fund balance in order to avoid tough decisions will be back and forth. Those who want to use water sale proceeds for operating expenses will return. However, nowhere to be found in any of the options or budget discussions has been the need to slow down the rate of growth of the school transfer. This is the financial dagger hanging over the head of the city. Perhaps the lack of discussion results from the fact that only recently has pertinent information come to light due to the excellent work of Bill Royce regarding, among other things, that the superintendent's compensation package, which totals $280,000 after receiving a $22,000 increase this year, which is more than I get for my Social Security, thank you very much, for a school system of around 2,300 students. At the same time, the compensation cost of 5 administrators total about $1.2 million, hidden away under other professional wages, and expenditures of $1.32 million for leasing computers for the next 3 years were found. Is there no way to control these costs? No doubt other costs are buried away under vague or misleading categories. Some of this, but by no means all, is unavoidable, but it doesn't facilitate a meaningful budget discussion. I'm well aware of the city's charter, which states the city council cannot tell the school division how to spend its money. The charter does allow the council to decide the amount of the transfer. I suggest that for the FY15 budget, expenditure for the school division be done at the level recommended, or the reduction be done at the level recommended by the city manager. Now, maybe Mr. Taves can tell me if I'm wrong, but the council cannot order the school division to reduce expenditures in a particular line item, but it is not prohibited from explaining why and in what areas the council believes spending has been excessive. So please, I request that you set the stage for the ongoing discussions. Am I incorrect?
Thank you, Mr. Kalin. Our last speaker is Joel Block. Mr. Block? Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for all the hard work that you've put into a very, very difficult situation. It would be wonderful if the economic situation were different and it were a much easier task, but I know how much you have to go through. Could I ask everyone in the gallery who's here to support the schools to please rise? Absolutely. We're here because we don't want to. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Kalin. I didn't mean to interrupt when you were speaking. We're here because we believe that we need to take care of the students, and that's our number one priority. We're not looking to spend more money per child. We're not looking to do something above and beyond. We have a high school that leaks every time it rains. We have buckets in our hallways. We're not looking at, we talk about a world-class education because of the effort that the people who work in the schools put in. How we dedicate ourselves not as a job, not as a place that we go where we work, but as our life, because we care about our children. And more children are walking into our schools every day. And we need to take care of every single child the same. We need to take care of all of our children. And we implore you to have these long-term conversations, as many people have asked, not on the last day of the budget, but throughout the year. Today, we need you to take care of the fact that so many more students have come in, that our numbers have grown so much that we can't keep that world-class quality of education that we speak about with such pride for our city without being fully funded. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our last speaker is Doreen Ruriak. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Doreen Kelly Ruyak. I live at 103 North Cherry Street. We moved to the city in 2004 specifically because of the school system. I very much feel the pain that a lot of people in this city are going through. When I talk to people about the rising taxes, about the concerns about spending, but I would be remiss not to come up here and tell you that I am one of hundreds of parents and families who made sacrifices to move here, who moved knowing we'd pay a higher mortgage, who moved here knowing we would pay higher taxes, and knowing that that would continue to increase because the schools were our priority. We're here not because we want to be as good as Fairfax County. We could pay a lesser mortgage, we could pay lesser taxes, and go to a good school in Fairfax County. We wanted to go to this excellent school system. We've made an investment. We want to see a return on the investment. We have. We've placed our trust in the school system. I've spent a lot of time in the schools this year as PTA president of MEH, and I can tell you what I see there every day is people working on a shoestring. I see people working with minimal resources to do extraordinary things. The student advocacy organizations can raise money to help with infrastructure. We can bring additional resources into the classroom. We cannot do what protects our investment in Falls Church and in our homes, and that's to keep class sizes as small as possible and to keep a good quality teaching staff here with competitive pay. Those are things we can't do on our own. We rely on our government to do that. So I just wanted to say there are many of us. We've invested in this city. We've invested in our homes. We feel the value is tied to the school system. We will pay it forward when we stay, after our kids are gone. If fate brought us somewhere else, we would know that our homes would sell because of the school system. If the school system erodes, and that could happen a lot faster than many of the excellent plans on the table for making this city sustainable, we need to remember right now, it's the schools. I applaud some of these discussions about city sustainability. I'd like to be part of them. I think they're exciting, but they have a long nose. They can have a long tail, but it's going to take a long time to come to fruition. Our school system's quality could erode in a fraction of that time, and to us, that's value. So thanks for listening, and thanks for all the hard work.
Thank you, and thank you for your work with the schools. We appreciate it. Okay, that's our last speaker. Let's go ahead on to our first item on the agenda. Madam Clerk, will you call that item? Since they're related items, why don't we go ahead and hear them called at the same time, and also the staff report on all the items at once as well?
TO 14-19 is an ordinance fixing and determining the budget of expenditures and revenues, appropriating funds for the fiscal year 2015. General Fund, School Operating Fund, School Community Service Fund, and School Food Service Fund, Sewer Fund, Stormwater Fund, and Affordable Housing Fund. TO 14-20 is an ordinance fixing and determining the FY 2015 to FY 2019 Capital Improvements Program and appropriating expenditure and revenue funds for the fiscal year 2015. TO 14-05 is an ordinance to amend Chapter 40 Taxation, Article 7, Tax Relief for Low-Income, Elderly, or Permanently and Totally Disabled, Sections 40-133 through 40-137. TO 14-17 is an ordinance setting the rate of tax levy on real estate, personal property, machinery and tools, and all other property segregated by law for local taxation in the city of Falls Church, Virginia for the tax year 2014 and the short tax year 2015. TO 14-21 is an ordinance to amend and revise Chapter 15 Fees, Article 2, Department of Development Services to include updates to fees and language. And TO 14-22 is an ordinance to amend Chapter 42 Utilities to revise to revise sewer rates and fees as of July 1, 2014.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Shields?
Thank you, Mayor Tarter, members of council, members of the public. What we would propose tonight in terms of a process is I could provide a brief summary of these items and in addition a summary of the 4 options that the council requested at its last work session. And then following that summary, the council could then open a public hearing so that you could get public comment on the 4 options and also all 6 of these budget-related items. And then take council questions and comments from there, just in terms of a process to go through these 6 items. And so I will first just provide a quick
Mayor
summary.
Carter, if I can just jump in for 1 second, just one request that I would have, just so we're not coming back around in the questions and possibly making it clear. I've had some discussions with the city manager on this, and I was hoping that we would have it at the dais and for the public as well. And that's on each option, if we can talk about what it does for the outer years as well, because I think that's going to be pertinent to the discussion rather than having that in a Q&A. If the manager can just put that up front, I think it would be helpful in trying to get to a decision point tonight.
Well, if you have that information readily available, so be it. If you don't, then I think it'll have to be part of the question.
I think you may, at least that was an ask that I had earlier in the week.
Briefly.
In each of the budget options, I'll just speak to questions that the council has already asked and that we've provided the council, and namely the use of fund balance in each of the or one-time funds in each of the budget options. And so first, starting with the ordinance on the budget of expenditures and revenues, the council has had, as I think everyone is aware now, about 2 months of work on this budget. You've had, this is your 3rd public hearing. You've had hosted 2 town hall meetings and other citizen-led public town hall meetings on the budget and the tax rate associated with it. And now the council does have the budget and all of the budget-related items for action tonight. And what does drive the calendar and the need for the council's action tonight is the treasurer will then prepare the real estate tax bills, and they have to do that in late April and send them out the first week of May. So like in many things in life, we need to obey what our treasurer, Kathy Kay, requires of us and setting these deadlines. And that's by city ordinance. So we have the original budget that the manager that I presented to the council on March 10th provided for a capital improvements program and for operating expenditures with a growth in the general government budget of 3.6% and a growth in the school's operating transfer request of 9.8% as requested by the school board. And working through the public hearings, the City Council asked for 4 options, and I will summarize those briefly. In the packet for this meeting, each of these 4 options are prepared as legislative action with all of the numbers following in tabular format after the description of them so that they would be accurate for Council's action tonight. The option 1 has a tax rate of $1.30.5. That's the current tax rate, and by lowering the tax rate to that level, there's a deficit of $1,597,000. So option 1 proposes to use excess revenues that are projected for FY14 and to use those revenues to meet FY15 operating costs. In addition, there are proposed to be $319,000 of reductions on general government spending, $316,000 of reduction to the transfer in the school board, and a $282,000 decrease in debt service using excess bond proceeds. So that totals $1,597,000. Under this proposal, the general government would grow by 2.9%, and the schools would grow by 8.8% for their operating budgets. This proposal uses $1.7 million, as was contained in my original proposal to the City Council, of one-time money, of fund balance for pay-as-you-go and capital expenditures, plus $680,000 of FY14 surplus, which would be a total of $1,432,000 of one-time money in the FY15 budget. Shifting then to option 2, this option is also has a tax rate of $1.30.5, the current tax rate. In addition to using the $680,000 of FY14 projected excess revenue, this option would use $416,000 of the use of the water sale proceeds. This proposal would reduce general government spending by $219,000. There would be no change to the request by the school board for the school transfer, and it would also have the use of excess bond proceeds as the first option did. Under that scenario, the general government would grow by 3.2%, the schools would grow by the 9.8% as requested, and the total use of fund balance in FY15 would be $2,848,000. In option 3, the proposed tax rate is $1.33.6. That results in a deficit of $497,000, and that is covered only through reductions in expenditures. And so the total reduction in expenditures on the general government side is $215,000, no reduction to the school transfer, and then the reduction of the $282 for debt service per the other two options. Under that scenario, the general government would grow by 3.2%, and the schools would grow by 9.8%, and there would be no additional use of one-time money or fund balance in FY15, other than for the CIP and pay-as-you-go items. And then lastly, the option 4 requested by the City Council was a tax rate of $1.30.5. This uses $680,000 of FY14 surplus revenues. In addition, it uses $200,000 from fund balance. It has $219,000 of reductions in general government spending, $216,000 reductions to the school board, and then again the $282,000 reduction for the use of excess bond proceeds. Under this scenario, the general government would grow by 3.2%, schools would grow by 9.1%, and there would be a total use of $2,632,000 of one-time money in the FY15 budget. So that's a quick summary of the options that the council has requested and which are prepared for you. And then I will summarize the other items just very briefly as well. The CIP ordinance would be the next item, TO 14-20. The capital improvements program, as I've noted before, does rely on $1.7 million of the use of fund balance for pay-as-you-go items and to provide the local match for transportation improvements throughout the city. It is a very ambitious capital improvements program with improvements to our parks, facilities. It also has the first phase of funding for the Mount Daniel expansion, providing $8 million for that project. The additional $8 million would then be provided in FY16. The TO 1405 is an ordinance to provide enhanced tax relief for low-income elderly or permanently and totally disabled. This has been discussed in multiple work sessions and public hearings, but essentially it will double the benefit for current beneficiaries or people who are able to have tax relief through income qualification, but also it expands the eligibility by providing higher income limits to be able to take advantage of tax relief. Item 4 is the ordinance setting the tax rate. So in the council's packet, the tax rate is listed as the $1.35 increase in the rate for the real estate tax rate. So depending on the option on the budget, then when we get to this item, the council will need to make a motion from the dais to strike that line or possibly not change it if you go with the manager's original proposal, but to go with the tax rate that mirrors the budget that you have voted on in item 1. And then item 5 is the developer fees. The goal here is to provide increased fees for building permit activity. And there's 2 components to it. One is an across-the-board 10% increase in our fees, and then in addition to that is a 10% charge that would be dedicated for information technology upgrades that we'll use to expedite the building permit process. And with those changes, we believe we'll be able to sustain about a 75% coverage rate for a building inspection, building permitting activity. And we'll continue to monitor that, ultimately with the goal of having that be essentially a self-sustaining enterprise. And then the last is item 6, relating to our sanitary sewer fees. And 3 years ago, in response to the capital program that we were required to undertake to upgrade our sewage treatment plants in Arlington County and in Alexandria, we undertook debt to pay our share of those plant upgrades, and the sewer rate increase of 9% is part of that financial plan to cover that increase of debt service. And those are all covered by, or to meet EPA mandates to improve water quality in the Chesapeake Bay. So that's a quick summary of the 6 budget items. And then again, I would recommend that we have the public hearing on these, and then be happy to answer any questions or requests for further information from council.
Okay. Before we continue, I'd like to read a disclosure. With respect to City Council's consideration of the city and school budget, I would like to disclose that my wife is employed by the City of Falls Church Public Schools. My wife is a member of a group of 3 or more persons, the members of which are affected by the city and the school's budgets. I certify that I am able to participate in this matter fairly, objectively, and in the public interest. Ms. Conley?
With regard to the discussion of the city budget, I disclose that I am employed by Falls Church City Public Schools, and this discussion pertains to my employer. However, I am a member of a group of 3 or more individuals affected by this matter. I certify that I can participate in the discussion fairly, objectively, and in the public interest.
Thank you. Before we get started, or at least continue on, we have 4 options on the table. If there's any way we can whittle those down, I think it probably would make the evening go a little quicker if there are folks who wish to remove an item or the like.
Mr. Mayor, if I might.
Sure, Mr. Duncan.
Mr. Mayor and colleagues, you'll recall at our last work session that the 2 options that we were working with going in were the manager's option and what is now called option 1. During the course of that work session, options 2, 3, and 4 emerged. I think that by default that made me the patron of option 1 since I'm the chair of the budget committee. I would offer to set aside consideration of option 1 in the interests of speeding our discussions tonight, unless there's objections from anyone else.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Any objection to removing that item from discussion? Okay. Anyone else wish to remove any matter from discussion? Okay, so we have 3 items before us then. We have had public comment on these matters, but I am opening the hearing nonetheless to the public. If anyone wishes to speak further, now is the time. Seeing that there's no one else to speak, there is one more person to speak. Welcome.
There is. I'm Robert LaJeunesse, 409 South Virginia Avenue. I didn't prepare to speak today, but since Mr. Kalin rose in favor of option 3, I feel compelled to speak against it. First, I'll congratulate the council on once again pitting the school community against the other constituencies in town, meanwhile making it an easy job for Wall Street to come in and give us a credit rating in the city that is above the credit rating of the U.S. government. That's unthinkable that that is the case, but that's what S&P tells us. I'd also like to speak to the question of the notion of operational needs. We've said that we're not supposed to dip into pre-funds, the many pre-funds that the city has to pay for operational needs. But what are operational needs? Is debt service an operational need? For the last 3 years in this city, we've reduced our debt service simply by refinancing our bonds. And so those are not fixed from year to year. They cannot be called an operational needs. What about pre-funding our pensions? Are those operational needs? No, that's another financial ratio that can be negotiated from year to year. What about pre-funding our infrastructure? A lot of that is happening through pay-as-you-go funding. Pay-as-you-go funding is like paying for a new house by trying to save for the entire capital cost of that house. And every year we put more and more money into pay-as-you-go funding. What about traffic calming? Traffic calming around bus stops has been an important issue in this city. Is that an operational cost? Most of it would come through it would entail infrastructure changes. Those infrastructure changes could be paid for through a capital expenditure. And in terms of pre-funding the fund balance, is that an operational need? From my reading of the fund balance, what we're talking about here is additional fund balance monies, and that we've already achieved 17%, which, as all of you know, in my opinion, is far too high, and we're talking about money that would otherwise be above 17%. And so I just ask you to keep that in mind. I'm not going to go on record as to which option I prefer, because I think you could have been a lot more aggressive and actually reduce the tax rate, but I'll commend you if you, in fact, keep it fixed at the current level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And unless there's anyone else who wishes to speak tonight, this matter will be closed to the public. The matter is closed to the public. Are there any questions for Mr. Shields? Mr. Baruch?
Mr. Shields, I was hoping that we were going to go through the options a little bit, but I kind of want to do this by asking some questions. I know that we've taken option 1 off the table, but I think it's important to look at all the options. And again, my questions go towards the effect that this is going to have as we start after this budget immediately, essentially turning around and working on the outer year budgets. And I just kind of want to lay it out for the community and my fellow council members what this means and what actions that we're going to take tonight means for the future years, for our community, for our children, and for all homeowners and property owners and businesses within Falls Church. So if we can start, Mr. Shields, on option 1. I believe that you mentioned that utilizing one-time money this year, that essentially puts us at 1.4 million on option 1.
I have to say, if this option's not on the table, I don't think we ought to spend a whole lot of time on it.
I think it's important to look at, again, I want to just draw sort of the extremes in where we're at in the bookends.
If you want to do that briefly, but we've got plenty more to discuss, and that option's not on the table anymore, is the best I can tell. Go ahead.
1.4 million.
Okay. Like I said, I don't think this is going to take long, but I think it's an important point as we look at all the various options. Mr. Shields, what are we looking at with option 2?
Option 2 has a total of a reliance on one-time money of $2,848,000.
200, so 2.8 mil?
That's correct.
Okay, option 3?
1,752,000.
So 1.7?
Yep.
Okay, and option 4?
2,632,000.
I'm sorry, what was that?
2,632,000.
So essentially, those are the various gaps as we move into the next year's budget that are created that we would have to cover. Large part of that is transportation that we have other mechanisms of addressing, correct?
That's correct. And I would differentiate between the use of one-time money for one-time expenditures versus the use of it in the operating budget. And so they're different in terms of the challenges they would
So why don't we talk about that, and let's leave it just to operating and take off the table the one-time use for one-time use.
So for option 2, the use of one-time money is $1,096,000. Option 3, there's no use of one-time money for operating budgets. And then in option 4, there's $880,000 of one-time money for operating expenses in FY15.
So, and the reason why I point that out is that sort of gives us a flavor of what we're going to be facing next year with the various options and what that means and how we were going to cover the expenses on the operation side alone, leaving aside what we're going to have to do with CIP. And I'm going to stop for now, but I'll probably have some comments along the lines as we move forward.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Mr. Duncan.
Thank you. Could I just ask a quick question for everyone here and for me too, a reminder of the per penny throw of the tax rate?
1 penny generates $354,000.
Okay, $354,000. So, for instance, an $880,000 number that you cited there before would be about 2.5 cents on the tax rate. Thank you.
Other questions? No further questions?
Are we taking up other questions or just on the budget items?
If you
Or,
can,
I'm
if you have
sorry,
other,
just, on this or the CIP as well?
you can do that as well if you'd like.
I'll see if anybody has any other questions.
Go ahead, Mr. Berg.
Could I ask a CIP question?
Sure, of course, either one of you can.
Cindy, I just wanted a reminder of where we ended up on the ball field up at George Mason.
That is in the out year of the CIP with the commitment by the Planning Commission and staff to continue looking at it and revisit in FY16. I know our Rexham Park director and the athletic director are looking at the condition, the remediation, and we'll have a plan that we'll put into the FY16 to 20 CIP.
Okay. So communications have ensued since we talked about it at the work session, and progress is being made. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, they had started that communication prior
Even
to us
before.
reporting it at the
Right,
work
yeah.
session.
Okay. The other question relates to the City Hall and the library projects. Both, I understand, are booked in the CIP for further work, not necessarily, wrecking balls or cranes or anything like that, but just so the community will anticipate. The CIP does contemplate there will be work on both the City Hall and the library of some kind, whether it's planning or engineering or whatever. Some work will be done, is that right?
Correct. For FY17 for the library, there's $8 million for construction, and this Library Board of Trustees is currently working on a study update to address the recommendations by the Planning Commission so that that can be built into next year's CIP. The City Hall Public Safety Expansion and Renovation Project, as you know, is fully funded, and so we're currently doing the architectural design, and we'll be bringing back to council in May, early June, and the community some 20% designs that follow up from your February council discussion.
Thank you.
Questions on the CIP, Mr. Baruch?
Ms. Mester, on the CIP, if you can discuss how, I know that there's been some discussions about, the fund balance growing past 17%. Under the council's policy, anything over 17% goes towards capital improvements. Most of it, I think, this year would be going towards CIP. Is that understanding correct, that essentially anything on the fund balance that goes over 17% gets essentially put out towards CIP and capital improvement projects?
Yes, the 5-year CIP dedicates that money above the 17% to capital. So through the 5-year process, it brings it down to the 17%. And then based on the excess revenues for FY14 and how it's allocated in your options, you'll still be at 17% or potentially slightly below.
So after we pass this budget and the CIP, where does that leave us at the end of the year?
For the end of FY15, depending on which of the 3 options that are still on the table for the operating budget, you'll be at 16.3 with the proposed manager's budget.
Okay. So we'll be somewhere below 17% at the end of the day.
At the end of FY15, as projected.
Okay. Just, I hope that's, everybody's hearing that. It's not that we're keeping above 17%. We actually dip down under the various proposals below our target, and anything above 17, if we start bumping up, goes out towards capital improvement projects. And that gets me to the second point. I know that we had an infusion of money coming in from some sale of assets recently, one of the mailbox, et cetera, property, and also of the post office lot. Can you speak to how those are being utilized today? Or I'm sorry, not exactly today, but this coming budget.
Yeah, as proposed in the 5-year CIP that's before you today. Certainly, a large part of that is the fund balance that we just discussed. The sale proceeds from the mailbox and the post office lot is about $2.5 million, and $1 million of that is set aside for big chimneys and/or transportation projects in FY17. It's in FY17 to allow the project to be developed so we can assess and survey the impacts and then know best where to allocate that money. It was the Planning Commission's specific motion that the majority of that money be targeted towards big chimneys. But it's in FY17 so we could assess the impact of the development. The remaining of that money is targeted for capital projects as pay-as-you-go throughout the 5-year period, and they would cover the $800,000 for the 30% transportation match. That's actually going to bring in $800,000 of revenue sharing money, which will upgrade 4 traffic signals in the city, the signals, the ped heads, the crosswalks, the whole pedestrian accessibility. It will also be used for school and general government facility reinvestment and modernization, the community center HVAC, $250,000 towards the campus planning implementation for the roadmap recommendations, park master plan implementation, and $100,000 for Howard E. Herman Stream Valley Park to marry up that with the daylighting stormwater project.
So the bottom up of that is basically part of that money is being utilized this coming year if the CIP is approved for capital improvement projects?
$952,000 would be in FY15 and $552 would be in FY16, with the remaining $1 million put aside for big chimneys transportation in 17.
Thank you very much.
Other questions?
Before Ms. Mester sits down, sounds like a great menu of infrastructure improvements citywide, which is a very important part of what we're doing here. There's always a lot of focus on, the operating budget and the tax rate and so forth, but the CIP component of what we do is extremely important and has tremendous long-term impact. Just wanted to note that and thank Mr. Berg for taking us through some of the ways that our taxpayer dollars are going to be spent. I did want to ask a question about the unassigned fund balance. Ms. Mester, the council-approved policy on the unassigned fund balance says, quote, "The goal for unassigned fund balance shall be 17%, but not less than 12% of the actual general fund expenditures for the then current fiscal year." That's from the, as I say, council policy, which you can find on the website. Is it accurate to say that you expect by the end of the fiscal year that we are now going to be voting on, that our unassigned fund balance will be not less than 12%?
The projection in the proposed budget had it at 16.3%, and I'd have to defer to the city manager, CFO, for any ratios we might have calculated for the other options. So it's projected at 16.3.
16.3. Thank you.
And the policies, as you noted, are in the budget book, and there's parameters for what to do when one falls significantly below the 17%. And to your point, and Mr. Brooks, for the CIP projects throughout the city, I'd call the community and your attention to page 261 of the budget that has those maps, and it really shows the diversity of covering a variety of types of projects as well as geographically throughout the city.
Just one further thought, if I might, and there will be another time and place to talk in more detail about the fund balance, but if you read the policy, it actually contemplates a very, I would say, gradual and structured process for rebuilding the fund balance when it drops below 12%. Now, I realize that the war of thought that we're having here is the professional association literature that the CFO has provided us, which indicates that a jurisdiction almost of any size, certainly one of our size, should keep 2 months expenditures in reserve, and that translates to about 17%, thereabouts. So there's actually a little disconnect between council policy and the way the process have been implemented. And I just want the community to be clear that we are going to be well above, in fact, nearly at the top of what council policy says that we should be at for unassigned fund balance at the end of this fiscal year.
Any other questions? Mr. Baruch?
Just want to turn back to the actual budget ordinance itself, so TO 14-19 and the various options. Mr. Shields and possibly our CFO, Richard LaCondre, if you sort of want to put this into some real terms as far as the various budget items and what they mean, again, as we begin to build the future budgets. Can you speak to that about what actions would be available to us? I know that you gave us a summary of some of the options that would be available and what that would mean as we're building out your budgets.
Specifically with respect to the $800,000 local match for transportation and any use of one-time money for the operating expenditures?
Correct.
Well, the $800,000 local match for transportation, that currently the required local match is $800,000. And that is, on one hand, it's all for capital projects, and so it's an appropriate use of one-time money. On the other hand, it's a recurring expenditure because we know if we want to access the state funds in FY16, we still need to have that local match of $800,000. What most of our peers in Northern Virginia have done is adopt a commercial and industrial overlay of approximately 12 cents on commercial properties only, and that is, I think, what the General Assembly initially envisioned in terms of localities' local match to access the state funding. The city has not adopted that tax, and so that would need to be, I think, possibly something we would consider for FY16 to generate revenues for that local match. The other options would be the equivalent of a 3.2 cent increase across the board to generate those funds. I'm sorry, 2.3 cent increase in real estate taxes across the board, or make reductions in expenditures to come up with that 800,000. So that's that piece of it. And then with respect to any use of one-time money in the operating budgets, as we've discussed, that just starts your FY16 budget planning with that revenue, essentially a structural imbalance in FY16, and so that will need to be part of our budget planning beginning in the fall when we start to assess our revenue forecasts and our expenditure forecasts.
And that's going to vary depending on the option, essentially.
Excuse me?
That's going to vary depending on the option, what structural imbalance we're looking at as we
correct.
build the budget. Okay. Thank you.
Other questions from Mr. Shields?
Mr. Mayor, if I might, to follow on to that discussion, and it is one that we have talked about in work session, having at greater length and depth. In other words, how do we generate more revenue? That is the fundamental challenge. There are, I think, three ways to generate more revenue. One is to cut costs, restrain costs. Two is to raise taxes of one kind or another. And the third is to generate new revenue. Without putting you on the spot to throw out any numbers, but can you just ballpark examples of, say, Lincoln and Rushmark, two projects that we've approved that will be coming online, or Broad and West and Kensington? You know, take your pick. Just give the community some sense of the sort of economic revitalization that needs to occur in order to generate the revenues to close the gap, the structural imbalance, if you will, that was identified.
Well, that is a big question. We spend a great deal of our time together working on ways and strategies to grow the city's tax base to help us with our overall financial sustainability. These are long-term efforts that bear fruit over the long term as well. This year, just as an example, we do have a new hotel coming online. We have the Northgate project coming online, and so that provided for about 6.6% of organic revenue growth in the city of Falls Church, significantly higher than Arlington, Fairfax County, or other jurisdictions in Northern Virginia. So in this year, we have an increase in our tax base that has made this whole budget process a lot easier than it otherwise would be. Next year, the Hilton Garden Inn will be fully priced in. In other words, we will have already sort of built that revenue into our operating budget, similarly with Northgate. And we're anticipating the revenue from the Fortune grocery store up at the Eden Center. And so those will all be sort of baked into our operating budget by the time we're starting FY16, because we've counted on those revenues for FY15 budget development. So we do need to continue our efforts, and density in our commercial districts, appropriate density that meets with community values and meets all of those needs, but fundamentally needs to meet our fiscal needs.
Thank you. That's responsive to my question. Just one other add to that, which is when you talk about revenue growth for a project, for any project really, there are always public service costs associated with those projects, but the numbers that we deal with, that you give the council when we consider a project, are net revenue. In other words, net revenue counts in all public service costs, whether they be public safety or education or whatever they may be. So when you say that there is revenue growth, there's gross revenue growth, I understand that, but there is net revenue growth, and that's what we bank on, basically. Is that correct?
That's what helps the tax rate, that net positive fiscal impact. And so when you think of the big projects, the Harris Teeter project, the Reserve at Tenor Hill, those are projects that are going to have positive fiscal impacts this year, next year, and then most significantly in FY16 and 17. Those will also have a lot of spin-off economic interest and activity that will come with those. And so those are very positive developments for the fiscal health of the city. They will have service costs. And so we work very closely with the schools to model those, anticipate those, and after accounting for those have a net positive fiscal impact.
Thank you.
Other questions from Mr. Shields? Okay, why don't we go ahead and have comments and then take our votes?
Can we put forward a motion first before we do that?
If you'd like, sure.
I move to adopt TO 14-19, option 3.
I second that motion.
Okay. Do we have any other motions?
Well, I think we've got one primary motion right now on the table.
We do.
That we'd have to vote on.
I don't think we have to vote on this one particular. We could have the motions all on the table and then have our comments and take our vote at the end. Can we not, Mr.
Mr.
Tate?
Mayor, I think you have to have one motion. If you want a substitute motion, a member can make that, and that would take the place of the standing motion.
I don't think that's necessary. If you want to go ahead and vote on your motion, we're happy to do that.
Thank you.
All right. We have a motion on the table. Are there any comments that anyone would like to make? Okay, why don't we call Ms. Oliver?
When I was elected to City Council, my focus was on trying to make sure that the future of the city was the best that it could be. And I understood that there were a lot of pressures on the city in the short run. And I wanted to take a closer look at those and understand what we needed to do. When you look at what's happening in Falls Church, there are demographic pressures which are making this both an exciting and a critical time. If you look at the age of our population, if you look at the household makeup, we don't look like Fairfax County and we don't look like Arlington County. We don't have the singles that support the schools in Arlington County, and we don't have as many kids as we have in Fairfax County. At the same time, we have this aging housing stock, which is attractive for people that want to come in and tear it down and build a bigger house. And we have a community in this area which is interested in reducing their transportation costs. And so there are natural pressures outside of the school, the quality of the school, that are drawing people to this area. And we are going to see increased population. We are going to see bigger houses coming in, and we are going to see a lot more traffic. And we're going to see a lot more traffic because we also have
two large developments in Tysons and Merrifield, which are putting pressures on us. So when I look at all this, I see some really exciting opportunities because there's a lot of interest in this city, and I see some short-term pressures. And I think that we have to be thinking long-term, and that we can't be making budget decisions which are mortgaging the future. So the reason I like option 3 of the 4 options is because I think it does the most to make sure that we're investing in the short term in the way that we need to. And the hope is, and I think this council is fully committed to working through figuring out how we're going to manage and get to a point that's sustainable if we can do that. But making decisions on the budget to borrow from the future aren't going to give us any flexibility to do that. This is potentially a really exciting time for the city, and we need to leave ourselves the flexibility to do that. And that's why option 3, which has the least impact on our future fund availability, is my preference.
Thank you, Mr. Baruch.
Thank you. I just wanted to echo Councilmember Oliver's comments. I brought forward option 3 at our work session as a way to try to get to compromise. It's certainly not ideal. It doesn't hit on everything. I wish that I could come up with a way of keeping the tax rate flat, providing for the CIP, fully funding the schools, fully funding general government, and essentially trying to make everybody happy and yet not mortgaging our future generations. But the numbers just don't square. We've got demographic pressures happening not only to our schools, but also on the general government side within the need for infrastructure, et cetera. And there's really no way, despite the comments that you may hear from my fellow council members, that we're going to be able to simply grow ourselves out of the situation. It's going to take growth, but it's also going to take planning that's sustainable. And I'm going to pause for a second because I think the other options, other than option 3, put us in a hole. And let's be honest with each other. It does borrow money from future generations starting next year. Even option 3, which I'm favoring, does do some of that, to be clear. And it does that on the transportation side that we talked about to leverage $800,000 of money with local matching that essentially lets us utilize that as leverage. And it's an ongoing thing that I hope that we're going to be able to sustain. Ultimately, I supported that. I thank Vice Mayor Snyder for championing our transportation issues. I support doing that because it still is related to capital, but we are going to have to figure out ways of funding that that's sustainable. And we do have some options to do that, whether it's a tax overlay district, et cetera. So I'm comfortable utilizing part of fund balance to do that because it is, again, leveraging other monies. On the other options, again, it's simply borrowing from future generations starting next year and creating the gaps. There is no magic bullet here. There is no easy solutions. I think option 3 puts us on a road that's still sustainable, will allow us to continue to meet our CIP needs as we move forward, funds the school's request in full, does some level of cutting on general government that I felt were sustainable and didn't do damage in the long run. So I thought overall, while not ideal, it was the best option, and it also reduced the tax rate from what the city manager was proposing to a level that I thought was manageable. Again, I was looking for ways of closing that gap further, but absent mortgaging our future or trying to come up with other gimmicks, if you will, to make the numbers square. It just was not going to work. So again, when I look at this, what is in the best interest of the city as a whole? How does it best meet our future budgets as we move forward? What is sustainable for the long run? How do we meet our capital improvement project goals, which I think are needed, and yet keeps a tax rate, while not ideal, but meets our needs and you couple that with some of the tax relief that hopefully we'll be talking about next, I ultimately thought option 3 was the best way forward, and I look forward to working with my colleagues and others, no matter how this comes out. But I do think that if we don't go with option 3, we're going to be having much more serious discussions and less options available to us for next year. So my colleagues who are supporting the other options, I place the onus squarely on you to figure out right off the bat how we're going to close that option. So if you are going to move forward with that, I would encourage you to have those discussions now, if that's what your preference is, with the community, with the schools, because you are creating a gap from day one.
Thank you. Other comments? No, Madam Clerk, will you call the roll? Mr. Snyder?
Yeah, I want to express my appreciation for the thoughtful work that's being done up here in the dais, but far more for our citizens who are here tonight and who have addressed us. I've sat in on every town meeting, I've read every email, I've read every letter, and there's been some great thinking going into the budget this year. I do think, and I'm going to speak much more to option 2, which is my strong preference, but with regard to this particular option, I don't necessarily agree with the notion that the other options are short-sighted. I think we have an extraordinary amounts of money that are there. They're all the taxpayers' money one way or the other. And I do think a different way to manage long-term versus short-term is something that I prefer, although I respect my colleagues who have taken a different approach. But I think the tax rate in this particular proposal is simply too high based upon the input I've received from my citizens, and that's the reason why I'll vote against it.
Thank you. Other comments? Madam Clerk, will you call the roll call vote, please?
Mr. Baruch?
Yes.
Ms. Connolly?
No.
Mr. Duncan?
No.
Ms. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
No.
Mr. Z?
No.
Mayor Tarter?
No.
The motion fails.
Okay, do we have another motion?
Mr. Mayor, before we go to another motion, let me discuss option 2, if I might, because I want to explain how I got to these numbers and have a continuing dialogue with our community, if I could.
Absolutely.
Then I'll entertain a motion at the end, and there'll either be a vote on it or not. As I said a minute ago, I think the input this year from all of our citizens was really extraordinary. We've gotten good input in the past, but the ideas that came forward, the expression of concerns from all standpoints has never been better. In fact, it was a great Falls Church type debate and discussion, so my appreciation to everyone. Another point I wish to make is this budget is just simply a point in time. We are part of a much larger continuum. A continuum that will continue as we close out this year's budget, and my understanding is that the surplus will even be greater than we're proposing at this point. It's a continuum that involves the use of sale of the water proceeds, which we now think may be north of $18 million. It's a continuum that involves appropriate use of the fund balance and the preservation of our fund policies. And every bit as importantly, setting aside dollars and cents for a minute, it's a continuum in assuring quality public services and first-rate schools. So what are sort of the variables that I tried to put together in which I think is the most responsible, representative approach to the budget this year? And this isn't necessarily my view. I don't have anyone in my household that works for the Falls Church Schools. I was lucky enough to have my kids educated here, and they got a first-rate education. And who am I to deny what I was given to other people? So that's a point I want to make. The second point I want to make is, and it's been more than 7 years since I've had kids in the school, so I'm now paying for people that have their kids in the schools, and I don't now. So the second point I want to make is, though I'm also sensitive to those who believe and are deeply concerned with our tax rate. That's a concern I share. I pay the same taxes everyone else does, and I'm concerned about that as well, and we need to continue to work on that. So I felt, first of all, that we needed to, once the symbolic nature of the zero tax rate increase was out there, I wanted to try to find a way to get there because I understood the importance to people and I understood where it was in the debate. Now, on the on the expense side, I went through the city budget. We had numerous hearings. After looking at it all, I was convinced that the most of what the city was proposing in terms of new hires was simply unnecessary. And so I was willing to make a cut in the proposed side on the city side. A concern I had was police protection. Demands for police protection are going up, and I was willing to consider whatever increase was necessary on the city side to provide this community with the public services that people have a right to expect. The message came back, we think we can manage it without increased money beyond that which was in the proposed budget. Then I turned to the schools and I asked publicly and privately. I pressed on them to get even more savings than has been talked about here and likely the option that'll be passed. I looked at their budget. I talked privately and publicly to members of the school board and their management. And what it came back was the cut as proposed in option 4 will mean we can't hire as many teachers and class sizes will go up. If that is the case, I can't in good conscience support a budget that allows us to degrade our school system, particularly a school system which this week was recognized as being the best high school in Virginia. And just today, Mary Ellen Henderson had several awards, both with the performance of his students and the performance of his teachers. Why would you ever cut a school budget that's actually performing if you can find other ways to deal with the situation? And I believe there are other ways. Now, let's talk about long-term for a minute. This operating budget has $5 million in debt service. Those are all long-term capital expenditures, which we've decided to pay out of current operating as opposed to pay out of capital budget. This budget also contains $1 million in PAYGO capital expenditures. Again, we have the option to fund that in various ways. Then we have the water sale proceeds. My option 2 does not call for using the water sale proceeds to fund the operating budget, but rather calls for water sale proceeds to use against one-time capital expenditures that we're otherwise funding in this year's operational budget. So if this begins to look like a complicated word game, if you will, it's important to get to the basics. What do you want done and what do you want to pay for? Let's talk then about another element of the budget that hasn't been talked about so far. That's the stormwater fee. The fact of the matter is that it would be entirely appropriate to use water proceeds to pay for, at the very least, the capital part of the stormwater fee. And yet I proposed that, and that went nowhere as well. The response from the city manager was, well, the bills are ready to go out and we're not going to really consider that seriously. So for all of these reasons, I proposed option 2. Number 1, it achieves the tax rate that I believe our citizens now believe we need to meet, and I do want to be responsive to that. Number 2, it assures that our schools will be good today and tomorrow, because believe me, it is not long-term thinking to shortchange the schools today. Number 3, it fully funds, with the exception of a few new hires, the city budget that includes extensive capital investment in the future, everything from transportation to you name it, facilities, whatever. And so for these reasons, I felt that that was a responsible approach. There may not be others who support me. I respect that. I really want to end on a positive note. There's a lot right with this community. We've got a lot going on. We have schools that most communities would literally die for. We have public services that are first rate. We have a citizenry that's engaged and helps us make critical decisions. We have a lot going on in terms of economic development. Whatever the decisions are tonight, I think our future has never been brighter, and hopefully we will unite together to make sure that that's the kind of future that we want, that we will have, and that will make this community as desirable in 50 years as it is today. Thank you.
Mr. Baruch, comment?
Thank you. Vice Mayor Snyder, thank you very much for bringing this option forward. There's several aspects of this that I like, that I think both of our options share in common. One, of fully funding the school request, And also, I believe the similar cuts, for the most part, on the general government side that don't do harm are included in that. It's an option that I really, really, really tried hard to like and to get there. I think the goal of the option is really to leave the tax rate at the 1.3 cents. However, I think the point of departure, and I think both Vice Snyder and myself try to work out a mechanism for utilizing at least part of the water sale proceeds, which I think are a key component of this option, to handle capital expenditures. And I was willing to do that and explore the options. And I know that city staff, and they may be able to speak to this tonight, I had asked them to look at ways of utilizing part of the water proceeds even higher than the amount that's proposed here, to the tune of $419,000, to defease debt service, essentially take it off the books and capture the savings. To me, that would be truly utilizing one-time money for one-time expenses, is essentially buying that debt off, capturing the savings, and then utilizing that savings towards the operating budget. What I got back is they looked at the various options. There was no quick fix there because they all had expenses, penalties, you name it. I got a million reasons why it wasn't going to do much to do that. So what this option really does is it pays down essentially the payments for the year, and then we're facing it next year. So it wasn't a full solution. I don't want to sort of get into, well, is it not going to CIP or capital? I don't want to get into that discussion, but the bottom line is it didn't fully remove the debt and kept the obligations going, so essentially would be facing it next year as well. So I think it's a worthwhile proposal to talk about. Ultimately, it's not one that I can support because it doesn't, again, fully address what we do next year. It covers us for this year, but doesn't address the gap that's created as we move forward. But I commend Vice Mayor Snyder to trying to get us thinking about it. I wish that there was a way that we could save some money by defeasing some of the debt, but I just don't think that we can get there based on what I received from staff.
Thank you. Other comments? Do you want to make a motion, Mr. Snyder, or?
I don't think there's the sentiment here to support this. If there is, someone should let me know, but I'm not going to put the council through a vote on this if there isn't sentiment to second it and vote for it. So I'm not hearing that, so let's move on.
Okay. Let's go on then to option 4. Is there a motion relating to option 4? Mr. Z?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to move to adopt PO 14-19 option 4 on second reading.
We have a second for that motion? Ms.
I'll second.
Mr. Duncan on the second?
Second.
Okay, before we take a vote, do we have comments that people would like to make? Mr. Z?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to make a few key points on how this option was put together. I'm sure others will be vocal and articulate in their support or dislike of this option. Last fall, I ran a platform of great schools, fair taxes, and a well-designed city. Last year, my family and I passed our quarter century in the city of Falls Church without having a single child in the school system. The budget proposal being proposed is one that's made possible by the careful stewardship of city and school staff of our precious monetary resources. And we understand that the rising value of our properties is reflective of the excellent and recognized quality of our school system and our unique location in Northern Virginia. Bless you. It is never comfortable to propose to act on a budget that asks for some degree of sacrifice no matter how large or small. This budget does ask for sacrifice, but is relatively modest. It asks for a sacrifice of a small amount from the fund balance, which, as you look at it, entered FY 2014 with 17.1 in reserves, and we've seen it grow to 19.6 in the first quarter, 23.8 in the second quarter, and now 24.2. And in fact, this is not the first year it's done that. From page 56 of the budget document that's proposed, it says, in 2013, the city's financial results of operations produced a $2.4 million surplus, bringing the city's fund balance to 21% of expenditures, surpassing its 17% target stated in its financial policy adopted in December 2011. The FY 2015 budget has incorporated the fund balance in excess of 17% as part of the funding for the city's capital improvements program. The other remaining cuts, a little bit more than $200,000, represent less than 0.5% on the part of the school and on the part of the city. I think I can rely on the careful stewardship and proper management of city and school staff to come up with a way to address $213,000 in a $48 million budget. And to add, the $200,000 being taken from the fund balance is less than the natural loss in value over years' time, just from sitting there. In our city, yes, we have children, 17.1% of our population that go to our schools. We have retirees and people over 65, making up 10.4% of our population living on fixed income. We have federal workers at 28% who have not seen a pay raise, in over 4 years. I think we can put them in the same group of people living on fixed incomes. Adopting this budget option will allow us to have the time we need to grow the revenue piece and keeps those with fixed incomes and limited means in their homes for the definable future. If selected, this budget will allow us to address moving forward with outreach to the development community to help us grow the revenue pie and achieve the goal of a well-designed city. And finally, we intend to begin work on next year's budget almost right away. And let me remind my colleagues, a good budget is one where no one is completely happy. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Others, Ms. Conley?
Budget building in Falls Church is always a community process. Every year there is a new twist, and having been part of that process for many years with many of you that are here tonight, this year my new twist that I learned is that it's one thing to have a viewpoint and comment, and it's another to listen to such a wide variety of opinions and come to a decision or compromise that is in the best interest of all, because every need is real, and we heard from people tonight and everybody had a different take on the same situation. So at some point, you really have to put aside your personal preference and compromise. I watched the school board consider their budget and was impressed with their thoughtful discussion with the best interest of students at heart. And I've also been part of several council discussions, and I've been equally impressed with my colleagues' careful consideration, all with the best interest of the whole city at heart, but all coming from a different viewpoint. I'm especially pleased that after we vote on this, we're going to be able to vote on property tax relief for senior citizens and those with disabilities. So do we agree on everything? No. Is it a perfect budget? No. Not everybody's going to be happy on the council or in the community, but we should really all be happy at how well we have collaborated and compromised, and that really is a win for everybody in the city. And we heard some dire predictions tonight, and I think we're really going to be able to move forward and exceed those dire predictions and move forward in a really positive way. If this is voted on. I do have 3 concerns that we really need to address in the short term, in addition to other long-term concerns, but I just want to mention my 3 short-term concerns. 2 of them relate to the school population. One of them is the opening of Northgate, which is already has people living in it now, and by next school year will be full. There's a chance that everything will come in exactly as projected and there won't be a need for new staff to meet new students, but the schools in the city really need to work together to monitor that. Last July, the council passed an ordinance that gave people who were living on a single lot that could be subdivided into 2 substandard lots the option to sell and have that developed into 2 homes. I think we're really going to see a land rush, and I think we really need to pay attention to that to see how many more single-family homes are coming online in the next few months. And then the last thing is part of this budget conversation, we had some discussions about what is a capital project, what's a small capital project, how do we pay for those things, do we bond them, are they part of an operating budget? And I know that we are not going to discuss that tonight, but I really think we need to come up with a way to do that equitably so that the police, the schools, and the library are all paying for those long-term capital expenses that are smaller in the same way. And solving those 3 things is really going to require true collaboration among City Council, School Board, the staff at the Flower Building, and at City Hall.
Thank you, Ms. Conley. Mr. Duncan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Everything needs to be said, but not everybody needs to say it, and I'm just thrilled to sit up here with these fine folks. I hope you all see that we don't always see eye to eye. This is a budget that has been hard-borne. But even when we don't see eye to eye, we can have our discussions in a civil and thoughtful manner, and always, I think and hope, with the belief that the city has tremendous potential. And I want to thank the Vice Mayor for his dedication to holding the tax rate level for all the reasons that he said. I'm right with him on that. I appreciate his efforts to dig under every rock to try to find resources to prevent any cuts from being made. I'm a little like Mr. Baruch. There's an awful lot of Mr. Snyder's proposal that I like, but I just can't quite get past the sort of promise that I made to myself and the voters, which was that if we sold the water system, the money that we got from that sale would be dedicated to some very tangible, understandable, visible, community-wide benefits so that everyone could say someday, yeah, they had to sell the water system, but for that they got to fill in the blank. Library, school, city hall, whatever. Something that everybody could reach out and touch. Mr. Z's defense of his budget proposal, I thought, was the most eloquent thing I've heard lately. Ms. Connolly and Mr. Tarter in our discussions about this budget have just shown tremendous diligence and integrity and independence. It is difficult to be up here and come from the schools community when you can't give the schools everything that they have made the case that they should have. I too, like Mr. Snyder, have had kids go all the way through the school system. I've done every field trip and booster group that there is and sold mulch and all that. And it's not an easy thing to have to draw a line and say, this year we're going to have to ask for some sacrifices for the sake of the good of the whole community and ultimately, I think, the good of the school system. Where I'd like to get us is the place where the community was when we moved here in 1985, when the school system had barely 1,000 kids. And just a few years earlier, there was serious talk that we were just going to have to fold it up because there weren't enough kids to keep the thing open. When I came here in 1985, everybody rooted for the schools. It was a mark of pride in the whole community, every generation. There was cross-generational support for public education. And I'd like to get us back to that point, and I think we can get to that point because we have set up and in some recent years this sort of, it's got to be one or the other, and I don't believe it does have to be one or the other. I think we, because of a location that is just terrific, have tremendous economic development potential. We just have to have the will to exploit that in a way that enhances the quality of life in our community, not denigrates it, but enhances it, makes it better. I think we can grow smart, and we can grow in a way that years from now people will look back and say those people in Falls Church had that tremendous long-term vision that Ms. Oliver talks about. So, sorry I went on a little longer than I had planned to. I would just like to close on this one thought, which is as soon as this budget's over with, we're going to spend May and June wrestling with the funds that Mr. Schneider talked about, the water sale proceeds. And that's a big amount of money. And we need all of you all to be involved in that conversation just as much as you've been involved in the budget conversation. That's almost as big a decision about our city's financial future as what we're voting on tonight. So thank you very much to everyone who's written, called, talked with me. Very thoughtful suggestions have been put forward. I've saved every one of them, and I resolve that in the spring and summer we'll go back through those and capture some of the really great ideas that have been presented by citizens. I don't know if they're all going to be able to be implemented to save costs, but I think many of them are worthy of consideration. And I appreciate the effort, particularly of the school board. I see several of you sitting here in the audience. You have modeled collaborative and cooperative behavior was the phrase that Chair Carney used in her email. I like that phrase, and it's a motto that I've tried to apply to my own behavior during this process. So I think that's about all I have to say about this. I am going to support the Z proposal.
Other comments? Mr. Baruch?
Just very briefly, I'm not going to be supporting this option, certainly. I like the notion that it proposal tries to commendably keep the tax rate where it is. But I believe in our work session it was referred to as the third option. So this is truly the sausage-making option, if you will. And that's sort of where I have difficulty with it. And I believe in our discussions, as far as I can remember, and probably as far back as the city manager can remember, and perhaps even as far back as Vice Mayor Snyder can remember, this is the first time council has proactively, without an economic downturn, actually dipped into fund balance to pay for operating expenses. So we can sit here and say, well, it's only 200,000 or it's 880,000. We can say all that. Say it's $1. Well, what about next year? Makes it all that much easier for us to again pull on the fund balance side. And there are real ramifications of that. Does it mean we're not going to do capital improvement projects to square the numbers next year? What is it going to mean? Are we then going to have to spike the tax rate to make up the difference? Those are all difficult decisions that we're just kicking down the road to figure out. So while it may not seem like a large dollar amount this go around, it does set a precedent. And I've said before that I'm not wedded to 17% or 16% or 10%. I think 17% of our fund balance makes sense. That's probably prudent. But when we set the policy, we should see how it goes or change the policy and then move forward. But just saying, you know, we've got a policy and we're going to dip below that because we need to square the numbers isn't the way to go. And as part of that, you know, it sort of picks the number on the reduction side on the school transfer to again square the numbers. I think I drew the analogy that it's really not, you know, other than trying to get to the numbers, I don't think that there's any more to it, even though we can't really go behind the numbers of the school budget transfer. It just doesn't get there for me on the notions that I've raised before. So this is not an option that I can support.
Thank you, Mr. Baruch. Other comment, Ms. Oliver?
I just want to add to Mr. Baruch's options that what I dislike about option 4 is that we are not only cutting the school budget, but we are cutting our own reserve and our own ability to respond to a serious possible future school need. This sort of seems like the worst of all options, and I'm struck by the symbolic nature of the zero tax rate increase. It's not that anyone thought that this is where our expenditures should be, they just thought that we shouldn't raise the tax rate. And of course, that's very easy to say, and I pay taxes just like everybody else, and I don't want my taxes to go up, but I want to make smart decisions, and I don't, I'm concerned about this option's cutting the schools without leaving the city any wiggle room either.
Thank you. Other comments? I'll just add a few if I could. First off, I'd like to thank my colleagues. Seems to always be a difficult process, but we have all worked collaboratively, and people have spent an extraordinary amount of time coming up with different ways and looking under every rock to get the most value for the citizens, for our city, for our schools. And so I certainly want to thank my colleagues for doing some extraordinarily creative and thoughtful work to end up with the options we heard tonight. In a lot of ways, the money distinguishing the different options was literally just hundreds of thousands of dollars. You know, we're not talking to tens of millions or millions, but just hundreds of thousands of dollars. But everyone felt so passionately about different, ways to get there, where they thought we should go. And so I appreciate that. And I think the city is lucky to have people who spent so much time really trying to do the best, and we have, for the city that we have done. But it's another challenging year. There are no easy answers to the pressures that we face. We have finite resources, and we're hard-pressed to satisfy everybody. It's just the way it is. Personally, I don't believe higher taxes are the answer. Our community has faced assessments going up approximately 7%. Single family, I think, was closer to 8%. With stormwater added in, you have approximately 10% upward pressures on our taxpayers without any increase. And so, although it's difficult, I think that's a real pressure that we need to consider. These same taxes are also passed on to our small businesses through pass-throughs and leases and the like. I have 3 children in the school system. I have 2 nieces in the school system. My wife works there, so I'm well aware of the excellence of the schools, the hard work of our teachers and other folks doing what they do, as you saw in the newspaper, making our schools one of the best in the country. So I'm keenly aware of that. And I don't think anyone can be happy with a proposal that gives the city and schools less than they requested. But both will receive over 99% of what they requested, both the city and the schools, with the proposal we're considering right now. And I think option 4 is the best of the remaining options, and I'm prepared to support it. Thank you. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll call vote?
Mr. Baruch?
No.
Ms. Connolly?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Oliver?
No.
Mr. Snyder?
No.
Mr. Z?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
The motion passes. Thank you, Council.
Thank you. And the next item?
The next item is the ordinance to adopt the capital improvements program. And I've provided a staff overview of that. I'd be happy to answer any questions, as well as Ms. Mester.
Okay. We can go ahead and open this up to the public. Is there any member of the public who wishes to speak on this matter? Appears everyone's heading the other direction. So thank you for coming this evening. We appreciate your hard work. The matter is closed to the public. Do we have a motion on this item?
Mr. Mayor, I move approval of TO 14-20 on second reading.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. Any comment? Any questions or comment? Okay, Madam Clerk, will you read the roll call vote on this matter, please?
Mr. Baruch?
Yes.
Ms. Connolly?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Z?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Thank you, Council.
Okay, let's move to the next item.
All right, just one note on the CIP. If I could just recognize Cindy Mester for all the work that she does on the capital improvements program. It is a long march through the planning commission, and she does it with a lot of brains and a lot of passion as well, and very grateful to her. The next item is the ordinance to amend Chapter 40, taxation. This is to provide tax relief, expanded tax relief for low-income and elderly permanently disabled, and this the adoption of this ordinance is assumed in the budget that was just adopted by the City Council.
Okay, let's open this up to the public. Is there any a member of the public who wishes to speak to this matter? Seeing none, the matter is closed to the public. Do we have a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt TO 14-05 on second reading.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Mr. Z on the second. Any council discussion? Mr. Z?
Just a small note here that I think this is the proper thing to do. It really directly benefits those least able to help themselves, and more importantly, keeps them in their city hopefully just a little bit longer. And that's all to the good of the city. It provides for the continuity and the culture of the city. I just want to remind those that are listening, and we should probably put this out, that there's a lot of wild rumors fluctuating, going through the, some of the people I've talked to that said it's a good deal for the city, it's a big investment, they charge you serious rates, and it says there plainly it's prime rate. So we need to make it known that we're not making money off this. It actually costs us a great deal of money and effort. Thank you.
Mr. Duncan?
Just one question. How are we going to be able to gauge the, usefulness of our expansion of the benefit? Is there at some point on the calendar where we'll be able to say, oh, now we have 8 more people who participate, or what's our metric of success here?
In putting this proposal together, there was some insight in terms of the people who come to us right now to apply for tax relief. And so amongst that population set, we could measure fairly accurately how the pool would be expanded. What I would propose is that perhaps in August or in September, we provide a report back to council on what our experience was, because we'll know in just a few weeks.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, do we have a motion? Do we have a motion? We do have a motion. Okay, I'm sorry. Mr. Baruch?
Just on the tax relief motion, this is one that I fully support. I think it's very important that we're taking action to do this. If we can just get sort of a status update on how this is going and actually being utilized, maybe quarterly, we're going to know sooner than that, right, Mr. Shields? We can just get a status of how it's going and also ways of improving this type of tax relief program. I know that we're somewhat limited based on what we can do by state law, but we may need to make adjustments to it based on the type of performance we're seeing. And I would just ask that this be reevaluated for next year's budget process again, because we may actually want to do more than we're doing this year based on our experience.
Thank you, Mr. Baruch. Any other comments? Why don't we go to a roll call vote, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Baruch?
Yes.
Ms. Connolly?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Z?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Thank you, council.
Okay, let's call the next item.
So the next item is the ordinance setting the rate of tax levy on real estate as well as on personal property. And on this one, we will need a motion that would be, I move adoption of TO 14-17 with one revision at line 73 to change the rate from 1.35 to 1.305. And so we note that for the council. I would also just note before the council takes action on this that this does set the rate for tax year 14, which is normal. What's new about this, as we've discussed, it also sets the rate for the short year of 2015. And so this tax rate and the assessed value that it applies to will apply to the June billing that people will receive just in a couple of weeks, next December billing, and then again next June. And so it will cover our full fiscal year for the first time since 1994. And so, you know, for this budget year, we have a very precise revenue forecast for real estate, and we will in ensuing years as well. I just wanted to note that as well.
Thank you. Is there any member of the public who wishes to address this matter? Seeing none, this matter is closed to the public. Do we have a motion? Mr. Z?
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to move to adopt T 014-17 on its second reading and amend line 73 at the part where it says rate of, currently says $1.35 to $3.05.
Second.
Well, hold on, let me correct that. There would be a $1.30.5. I think the best way to say it is 1.305.
1.305.
Okay.
I still second it.
Are there any comments?
Is the $1.35 figure on line 15 not relevant? That's just the staff report. Okay. Okay, thanks.
Okay, if any other comments, if none, let's go ahead and do a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Baruch?
No.
Ms. Connolly?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Oliver?
No.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Z?
Yes.
Mayor Charter?
Yes. Okay, next item, Mr. Shields?
The next item is the ordinance to amend our fees for development services. These are held in Chapter 15 of the City Code.
Okay, is there any member of the public that wishes to address this item? Mr. Clinton?
Hi, Tom Clinton, 711 Hillwood Avenue. I deal a lot with certificate of occupancy permits, and I just find this language a little troubling. The Director of Development Services may waive all or part of a certificate of occupancy fee for businesses relocating within the same building, and when the project involves no other permits and/or when an existing business in the same location changes its operating or trade name. So I can't tell you, it may raise a few $1,000s, but it generates an enormous amount of bad will among the small business community. And they can be our best salespeople for getting new businesses here. And I found that this is not applied equally. If you can imagine, our Director of Development Services is probably not his highest priority to making a decision on these. I'm not sure they ever even reach his desk. So I would just express a little caution about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shields. Do you have any comment or response?
Well, this has been an issue where businesses who are making a minor change that they have complained about having to pay the new certificate of occupancy fee, and so this is attempting to address that. And I wish I'd been aware of the concern before the meeting so I could provide the council with a little bit more background about how this, how the director intends to administer this. But it is coming up out of a desire to be responsive to a fee that I think a lot of people in the business community feel is probably unnecessary and not fair. And so that's just the additional background on it.
So if we were...
Can I just ask, what line are we talking about?
This is at line 335.
Thank you.
Page 11.
So if we were to approve this today, and it turns out that a couple weeks from now you come back to us and say, this isn't working, and we recommend a change, what would be the timing and process for that?
I think I could get information to the council really this week, just in terms of additional context on this. I know the city attorney tends not to like things he tends to like things to be more black and white. I don't think there's a lot of money involved. Let me...
Can I mention something? Mr. Mayor, members of council, I just want to point out that the language that Mr. Connolly wants to delete is actually language that gives the director flexibility to waive those fees. So in furtherance of not charging those fees, you'd need that language in there to waive the fees.
Is it your intention, Mr. Shields, that you would be waiving those fees? Okay, so we've added the fee and then also added language about you being able to waive it? Is that?
No, the fees has always been there. The question is, if someone is making a small change, are they charged the fee? And people have complained about that, and so this would allow the development director to consider the circumstances and waive the fee if it's a minor change. And so that's what's intended.
Does that address your concern, Mr. Clinton?
No, not really. I mean, I just think we need to just make a policy decision. We're going to waive it unequivocally every time, or we're not. If and might and circumstances, how does a business person supposed to understand those circumstances? They're not, and they're going to be frustrated. I know, they ask me, gee, this is $200 to go from one suite to another. What's that about? I mean, that's more than a legal per hourly fee. They don't come out and visit, and it's administrative address change. It's really very routine.
What is the fee we're talking about?
$200.
Okay. Any comments from council on this? Ms. Conley, do you have something to say, or are you not thinking?
I'm just wondering, Tom Clinton? On this list of fees, 334, down to 335, which one is it? Is it the...
It's the $200 fees, right?
Well, there's a couple 200s in here. It's the all other business uses?
No.
No? It's the final for a residential building?
Yeah.
I'm going to start playing the Jeopardy music here.
No, I don't,
You don't know which one it is?
It doesn't read well. I just know the practical effect it is.
Okay.
And I would also note the occupancy permit associated with the minor home occupation. Cindy kind of helped on this along the way. That was $200 too. So I think that a little dose of practicality and reasonableness was, brought to that be. The occupancy permit up until 2 years ago, maybe 3, was $40. So we increased it fivefold. And I'm not sure, for a full occupancy permit, it does go through zoning and parking, and there's some staff time involved. But when you're just changing a unit or a company changes its LLC name, $200.
Here's what one proposal would be, just to move this forward. Let's say it shall be waived for these examples, and then we can report back to council if there's a problem with that, and we can readdress it. But I think that would be, sort of going in the direction of the
I didn't come here to make a big issue of it, but on a practical day-to-day level, and you're weighing heavier issues tonight, it's just not sitting well, and I think you need to know that. I work with the small businesses every day, and they tell me these things, and I'm not sure what level they drift up to. Most of them just pay it and walk out kind of steaming, and I think we can do better. We talk about economic development. I think in this instance it's very little money, and I have tried to get an opinion on this from the previous city attorney. It's been a kind of a long, Wyatt has freely admitted that there's been some debate about it. I'm like that it's up for discussion. We got new council members. We need to talk about it. I'm happy with that language. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Duncan.
I'm just wondering, Mr. Mayor, if the gentlemen at the table have worked out whether that would be an acceptable change. I certainly would.
Well, I have a problem with that approach.
Geez. That's why I ask.
Because that would be a substantive change, and under your charter, you have to go back and have another public hearing on that. I think possibly a better option is to adopt this as is. Obviously, we can express to the director, the desire to have that fee be waived, and then come back with a minor amendment that basically doesn't require a waiver, but doesn't impose the fee at all. That'd be a fairly simple amendment down the road.
Comments?
Why is this a significant change?
It's a substantive change.
But it's also a decrease
What
in
makes it a
impact.
substantive change?
Pardon me?
What makes it a substantive change?
You're allowing for a waiver, and then
I understand the facts of it. What makes it a substantive change?
it's not a merely administrative change. I mean, And the way the charter is written is,
One small thing within 18 pages of documentation. And you think this would be enough to compel us to go back through the first and second reading?
that's
I
what you're,
disagree with you, Council.
okay, well, I'm just saying that's what the city's charter provides.
Well, I think that I would be the first to say that you're wrong.
Is-
We are exercising our statutory authority to collect fees in order to cover a portion of cost managing processing on land use, blah, blah, blah. Very small.
All right, why don't we try to wrap this conversation one direction or the other up? What are the other comments from council on this
I mean,
matter?
I'm not going to get into a back and forth with our acting city attorney about his legal interpretation. The last thing I want to do is sort of cloud this issue and have to come back to first reading on the whole thing. So what I recommend that we do, just move this forward as is. I think the city manager has direction of where we're headed, and then just bring it up with an amendment that we best see suited. And I don't want to change things around from the dais either without knowing what the implications are exactly. Because for all I know is we could make this change, and there's large developers, it's not sort of the mom and pop, that all of a sudden the fee doesn't apply to them. So I'd rather have some further thought about this. And right now, if it's pretty minor, the city manager has our direction that the intent is that this is to be liberally waived, and then bring it back.
All right, other comments? Mr. Snyder, Vice Mayor Snyder.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So as I understand it, we have a practice here that's causing some issues with small businesses. We have the city attorney that says we can't remove it because that would be a substantive change, sending it back to first reading. Well, and then we have a proposal that the city manager will liberally construe it. I mean, I favor deleting it. So the question is, if we deleted it tonight and then moved it back to first reading, no, if we deleted it tonight and gave it first reading tonight, then in our next meeting, we could give it second reading.
Well, we don't want to delete it because the way it is right now, we have the ability to waive the fee. If we deleted it, then we don't even have the
No, I
ability to
mean,
waive it.
delete that fee.
Change it to shall.
Yeah,
Shall
change
waive.
it to shall.
Okay, well, I tell you, I really wish we had been forewarned of this issue. And up here, the current policy that has been in effect actually for a number of years is, if you look at the strikeout that's just above, it says, note, this may be waived by the building official if the application is for a relocation by the same building permit. So that's essentially the current policy is discretionary to allow staff to waive that fee because it's a minor change. So that is the way we've been administering it. So the question has been raised, are we doing that consistently or fairly? Are people happy with the way that's been administered? And we need to get more information on it. That's essentially
Can we postpone this and bring this back once this is sorted out?
We could do that.
The problem is that we've got potentially major fees coming into the city from developments that are ongoing right now, and it would be a shame to lose thousands of dollars in increased fees for the major projects before us to the possibility of $200 here and there. Let me ask you, can we do this? Direct you, the city manager, to have an administrative policy that, in fact, you will give these waivers in these circumstances. The law would allow you to give the waivers, but we would direct you as just policy to grant them. And so we would, the ordinance would stay as it is on the books, which allows it, but you would have essentially guidance from us, possibly your own internal regulation that wouldn't have the force of law or the ordinance. Would that work as a way to basically get around this for the moment at least?
Are you asking me?
I was asking Mr. Shields, but it sounds like you want to say something, so feel free to.
I don't think that's the right way to do it. I don't think you can amend the ordinance that way. And by the way, the provision that I was citing is in section 4.10 of the city charter. And it says very clearly that if on its second reading an ordinance, other than an emergency ordinance, which is not here, be amended as to its substance, it shall not be passed until it shall be reprinted, introduced, or published as amended and a hearing shall be set and advertised, and all proceedings had, as in the case of a newly introduced ordinance. But again, I think there's an easy solution here, and that is adopt what you have before you. And the only change on that waiver issue is before, or right now, the building official can waive. Now the director can waive, and then we can come back in a month or so and restructure it so that there's no fee charged whatsoever for these minor changes in the building.
All right, any thoughts on that?
Sounds reasonable to me.
All right. Mr. Z, you have a comment?
Well, I don't want to wait a month. If we're going to follow your guidance, it's not going to be a month or so. You bring it back next time we vote on it, then. That's the only way I'll be satisfied with this.
Well, we need a new first reading, is that what you're saying?
No, I think it could come back the next time.
Okay.
Did it that way, sure.
Okay. So we can bring it back at our next meeting? One thing I would just note in terms of timing, this ordinance is supposed to be effective July 1st. And so we've got, if we come back in 2 weeks with that change, I don't think that would be too disruptive.
All right, well, let's not spend as much time on this as we did in the budget, so, all right, so we have a motion on the table, and we have at least, what is my calculation, about 8 weeks before it takes effect. So why don't we?
Sir, what is the motion to leave it as it is?
We've got a motion to adopt TO, whatever, TO.
Mr. Mayor, question. I'm sorry, but I'm not entirely satisfied with that approach. I don't mind doing that if in my motion to approve this ordinance, I also state that it's the intent of council that so-and-so. And I would ask Mr. Clinton what would be the kind of advice you would want. Just waive it.
Just to say it shall be waived. So it's no longer a discretionary thing, it's just when it meets these criteria, it shall be waived. I think that's what we'll come back to you with.
And so the intent is to adopt it as is today and then come back with an amendment in the next several weeks to be effective July 1. Is that what we've essentially discussed?
Well, yes, but I think the better approach is not to waive it at all, but don't impose it. If you don't impose it, it doesn't have to be waived as to minor changes inside a building. So there's no discretionary act that has to be taken at all.
You mean when it comes back?
When it's eventually adopted, yes.
Are there any circumstances where we want to charge this fee? I mean, a major client, major developer would have thousands of dollars in fees coming to the city. I want to make sure that we're not having the tail wag the dog. I don't really know, frankly, the circumstances in which this may arise. We've heard of some. It sounds reasonable in those circumstances to waive it, but it doesn't mean there aren't others where it's reasonable to impose it. I don't know the answer to that, and I guess maybe council would like to probably have more direction, at least I would, as to those circumstances for both.
And I don't know the answer to that question either.
All right, so let's get down to the bottom line here and move this forward. Your suggestion is to go adopt it now and come back with an amendment that changes this particular item before July 1. Is that what we're discussing? And so we'd have a first and second reading on amendment to what we might adopt tonight? Okay. Thoughts on that?
Let's go.
Okay. Let's go ahead then. We have a motion on the table, to my recollection, from about an hour ago.
No.
We don't have a motion on the table?
I move to adopt TO 14-21 with the expectation that an amendment will be forthcoming within the next 2 weeks on first reading.
I'll second that.
Okay. Unless the city attorney has anything further, we'll just go ahead and do the roll call vote on that. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll call?
Mr. Baruch?
Yes.
Ms. Connolly?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Z?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes. Okay, Mr. Shields, will you call the next item or describe the next
And the
item?
last budget ordinance is ordinance to amend Chapter 42, Utilities, to revise sewer rates and fees, and I spoke to this and the need for this sewer fee increase during the introductory comments.
Thank you. Is there any member of the public who wishes to address this matter? Seeing none, the matter is closed to the public. Do we have a motion?
two are here. It's going so fast.
I'll move to adopt TO 14-22 on second reading.
Okay,
I'll
we have-
second.
What's that?
That microphone on. I move to adopt TO 14-22 on second reading.
We have a
I second.
Okay, Ms. Oliver on the second. Is there any discussion as to this matter?
Just one simple question, Mr. Mayor, which I'll ask the city manager in succinct form. Why are we doing this?
We're doing this to pay for the capital improvements at the Arlington 4 Mile Run treatment plant and the Alexandria treatment plant to meet EPA mandates to lower our nitrogen and phosphorus emissions into Chesapeake Bay.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, let's go ahead and do the roll call vote, Madam Clerk, please.
Mr. Baruch?
Yes.
Ms. Connolly?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Z?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to the next item then.
TR 14-14 is a resolution amending Resolution 2014-16, establishing a George Mason Maryland Henderson Campus Joint Process Planning Committee to extend the term of the committee to July 1st, 2014.
Mr. Shields?
Mayor Tarter, members of council, the planning process planning committee has been hard at work. They have now had 7 meetings over the past 2 months to put together a draft roadmap. They plan to bring that to the council at your work session on May 5th. In order to have time to incorporate your comments back on that draft, they asked for an extension of their timeline to July 1st. They anticipate being done before then, but 2 more months to finish up the work.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Snyder, you've been actively involved in this process. Anything to add?
Absolutely not. Thank you.
Okay. All right, is there any member of the public that wishes to address this matter? Seeing none, the matter is closed to the public. Are there any questions or comments from members of council as to this proposal? Do we have a motion then? Anybody? Somebody?
Mr. Mayor, I feel bad doing this, extending a committee that I'm on, but I'll do it anyway.
Okay.
I move approval of TR 14-14 because it is very, very important work, and we are making progress. Thank you.
Second?
I'll second.
Ms. Oliver on the second. Any comments, questions? I think we've done that already, haven't we? Madam Clerk, will you call the roll call vote, please?
Mr. Baruch?
Yes.
Ms. Connolly?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Z?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Thank you, Council.
Okay. Are there any consent items? No. Okay. Any other business? Business not on the agenda? Ms. Connolly?
2 things. One is, I mentioned in my budget comments that I'm really concerned about the substandard lots coming from lots being split, and I would really like to have an update about that from Development Services. It was mentioned that it was going to come in the monthly DDS report, but I haven't seen anything since about 6 weeks ago. I know of at least another long-term Falls Church resident whose kids have graduated from the schools who has now sold his lot, and we'll be putting 2 on there. So
Is that a request you made to the city
that's
manager?
a request of the city manager, yes.
Mr. Shields, do you have any response?
I beg your pardon. I was engaged in a conference in a sidebar. I'm sorry.
My question was, the issue of the substandard lots being split from 2 lots. We had talked about that before, and it was going to be in the monthly DDS report, but we haven't seen it. We got all caught up in budget and haven't seen it. So I'm just asking for an update on that. I know of at least another long-term resident who has sold their 2 since then, who have sold their houses, and they will be split by developers.
Yes, we will get an update to the council as quickly as possible. And what I would recommend is that let's let the April data come in, and then we'll have a good, clean, as of May 1, here's what we know.
Excellent. Thank you, thank you.
And when do you anticipate that being available?
It's easy to produce, so we can, in the first week of May.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
And then my second thing is just, I would love to commend this partnership to everyone, and I'll go really fast. Jason Widstrom from the Stormwater Department has been working with Peter Mecca, who is a teacher at George Mason High School, along with the EPA and the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, and game developers, and they have developed a Facebook game that is called Stormwater Sentries, and it is about protecting watersheds from stormwater pollution. So the game developers worked on it. The kids in this biology class have been testing it based upon what they've learned in class, and they are giving feedback to the game developers. And this game is now live on Facebook. It's called Stormwater Sentries. So if you are a Facebook user, you can go play this game. But it's a really amazing partnership between Jason and the EPA and the schools, and has really made a difference for the kids in this classroom who are really excited about it. So I just want to commend all of them for that work.
Much. Any other comments from council members? Mr. Duncan?
Just one, the Government Operations Committee met, what was it, Wyatt? 10 days ago, last week. And the manager is working on a document that will discuss some of the issues that we brought up. I wondered, have you all decided what our agenda is like for Monday night's work session, or is that a mayor's meeting thing, or?
I'm bleary-eyed right now from the budget, so I don't.
Okay,
I don't have
the
good
only
answer
reason
for
I'm
that.
curious is that I have to do some family travel, and it's possible I might not be back on Monday, but I would try to be if we thought that topic were going to come up.
We have a full agenda plan for Monday, and that is not one of the items, so we will shoot for, I think, the next work session
Okay,
cycle.
that's fine. So your meeting agenda for Monday will forthcome in the next couple of days? Okay, thanks.
If you have a preference on when you'd like to see it on the agenda, why don't you just make that known to Mr. Shields, then we can try to work it in as quick as we can, or as close to when you want it to be heard as we can. Yes, Ms. Oliver.
I would just like to ask the city manager to please let me know how effective staff thinks the joint boards and commissions review of the Kensington project has been. I have heard feedback that suggests that boards and commissions are not getting the opportunity to provide thorough feedback on the project, and I am concerned because I know we are trying to process this project fairly quickly, but I don't want to bring it to a vote if we don't have full feedback from the boards and commissions.
What commissions in particular have you heard that feedback from?
The one that I've heard is from the Architecture Advisory Board, and that is a group, they did have an early look at the project, and I think they did have comments that were important, that many of which have been incorporated in, specifically around in terms of the use of EFS or cementitious board and other aspects. And so the project did change with their input early on in the process. But I think that as we consider this, what we tried with the Kensington, which is to have that sort of open house type of format run by the Planning Commission, there are certain boards and commissions that need that deeper dive, and the AAB is one of them. That is one of the boards and commissions that really does get, roll up their sleeves with the developers and make a lot of detailed commentary. And so we want to make sure that there's time and space for that to happen.
If I could just add, I think there just have been some questions raised about whether some boards and commissions felt invited to participate in the process, as well as whether or not the wrap-up of the meeting really elicited further comments. And I have heard this from more than one person, and so I just want to make sure that we're getting the full input, and that citizens that have volunteered and have, put time and effort into this have a chance to be heard by council.
So this is a fairly new process, to my recollection, and so I wonder if maybe it would be appropriate to actually poll, the chairs of the different committees and boards and find out what they think of the process and how it can be better, I think in some ways there's some fluidity to the development process, trying to make it better, quicker, but also get the right input. And I think maybe just flat out polling people, either a call to each of the chairs or maybe some sort of written, poll we can come up to how we can make it better, because they have different perspective than we do, and I think it'd be good to hear from them. That sounds like a good idea.
We have received input from CACT and the Environmental Services Council, at least I remember those coming across our desk. So you must be able to, put it on a grid and say the groups that we actually have heard substantive input from. At least we can know that, right?
Yeah, each of the boards and commissions were certainly asked to, once they came to the open house with the planning commission, then go back to their meetings and then have a well-considered recommendation to the city council. And the goal was to avoid having both the developer and or staff have to sort of do the shuttle, go to each one of these meetings to give all of our boards and commissions the benefit of a presentation. And the goal was to let everybody come together, share ideas, and share the same information together.
I'd be interested to know, following on what Ms. Oliver said, whether it did save staff time. I mean, that was one of the objectives of having that big group thing, and that is something that we have talked about in our GovOps meetings, of trying to arrange our meetings in a way that cuts down on the number of times that the staff has to give the same presentation to, small groups of people.
Well, again, I think it'd be good to get the input and feedback from them, and in a way that's useful to them and to us, to try to make this process better. To me, it's critically important we get the right input at the right time, in a timely fashion, for new development projects to encourage high-quality development here. So that would at least be my request, if no one else's, to solicit feedback in one way or the other by either a form or phone call, reach out. I think would be helpful. Okay, anything else? Any other comments? Mr. Snyder?
Mr. Mayor, I want to recognize all of those volunteers who made Arbor Day and the recognition of the city as a tree city again. The mayor received the flag on behalf of the community. It really is a community effort, and the fascinating thing is that we started this in 1892 when Benjamin Harrison was president. So if you want a long-term vision, the environment in Falls Church, it's here. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for attending as well. Any other comments, council member comments? Okay. Are there any minutes to be approved at this meeting? No, there are none. So do we have a motion to adjourn?
Mr. Mayor, I move to adjourn.
Second? Second. No one. Okay, second. Who was that? Mr. Duncan. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We're adjourned.